Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. Or as my wife says when she introduces me at dinner parties, plants and stuff. So that's kind of what I'm about. And it's nice to be hanging out with other plant lovers as well. I'm glad to be back here in Grapevine talking about one of my favorite subjects. We should have plenty of time for questions at the end of this program, but I wanted to just bring up our website, rootedin.com. We'd love to connect with y'all. If you have a question, 2 weeks from now, 2 years from now, we're here to help. We also have a list. I used to work for Texas A&M AgriLife, and we developed a fruit, nut, and berry list. Pretty much everything that you can grow in North Texas, as well as the best cultivars to set yourself up for success. And then we've kind of adjusted that, as we started Rooted In, branched out there, and you can find that at rootedin.com in our Ask an Expert section. Now, really, as somebody who's been growing their own food, at least some of it, since I was in 6th grade, it's really neat to see edible landscapes trending again. We saw that during the pandemic. I'll never forget the night where they announced that Dallas County was going to be locked down. I went to the grocery store and there was no produce there. There was maybe, some, random fruit or vegetable, but for the most part, it was completely empty. And so I went home, and I had lots of fruit trees there, but I went home and bought the lumber and built 3 more new raised beds. And growing your own food, not only does it help build resiliency, but I think it's a lot of fun as well. Over 42 million households are now growing at least some of their own food. In recent years, we've seen a 63% increase in millennials, which I think is pretty cool. It's first-time home buyers are more interested in growing some of their own food, and it's neat because their parents and grandparents probably did some of that stuff too, so connecting those 2 generations is pretty neat. We see it as a solution to different social and environmental issues as well. Food waste. Unfortunately, about 1/3 of the food that we grow on farms is lost through pest and disease. Then about 1/3 of food that we ship to the grocery stores as part of that transportation, if it's bruised or broken, that's lost there as well. Then at the grocery store, about 1/3 of the food that is sent to the grocery store is unused. When I worked for Texas A&M, we had a partnership with a local grocery chain, and I would go there every couple of weeks, and they would stockpile in their coolers all the produce that they would throw away. And I will tell you, most of that I would have no problem eating myself. In fact, the vast majority of it. And then when you take food home, anybody ever bought the little bagged lettuce or spinach or the strawberries, and you think, I'm going to eat real healthy this week, and in a few days it's all just turned to mush. But if we grow food ourselves, not only do we get higher quality, better tasting food, but it tends to last better. Unfortunately, they're a part of the Metroplex where they don't have as easy access to fresh fruits and vegetables, whether that are people that just don't live close to a grocery store, they don't have the ability or easy access to transportation to get to the grocery store. If you encourage people and you help people grow some of their own food, then they have better access. We mentioned we lost some food in the shipping process, but did you know that the average piece of produce travels about 1,200 miles to get to our doorstep? If you're buying organically, which certainly I like to do, especially if it's on sale and it's something that you actually eat the skin on, that travels about 1,300 miles to get to your doorstep. And so there's all types of fossil fuels and waters that's associated with that. And if we can grow food locally, then we can mitigate some of those natural resource losses. Speaking of natural resources, since there have been the challenges in California, who grows most of our produce in America, with drought, a lot of that has been shipped to South America. And so while South America does get a lot more water than we do, we're using up their natural resources, and then we're shipping that up here. And so again, we can kind of find some balance using our resources more sustainably. And then, I'm sure a lot of y'all have lived in the Metroplex for for quite some time. I've turned into my parents where I'm like, you know, when I was a kid, there used to be fields as far as the eye can see and agricultural fields. And now I live in Pilot Point, moving up there from Richardson a couple years ago. And it's just like they're just planting subdivision seeds and they grow up out of nowhere. And so if we can grow more food at home, then we're taking back some of that land to kind of a more agrarian use. The interesting thing is that for those that are interested in edible landscaping is y'all are one of the cool kids. The American Society of Landscape Architects each year does a study, every few years rather, to see what the trends are in landscape design and folks growing spaces that are more environmentally sustainable to reduce water costs and are lower maintenance. I would much rather spend more time out in the landscape enjoying it, maybe with a cup of coffee on a morning like this or a frosty beverage in a summer afternoon or evening. There's also trends in rainwater harvesting, native plants, pervious paving. When I went to school, I was one of the first person, I guess the first person to graduate from Texas Tech with an environmental horticulture program. And my mom was like, do you think this trend is really going to last? Of course, she wanted me to be a doctor. But I think there's a little bit of job security here now, unfortunately. 75% of Americans are interested in edible landscaping with interest in rain gardens, efficient irrigation, and reduced lawn area. And all these things really kind of go hand in hand, or kind of the holistic approach that we take is rooted in. Now, anytime we start talking about native and adapted plants, especially for those that are new to Texas or new to gardening in Texas, they think we're talking about water-wise plants and we're talking about yucca and cacti and landscapes that are full of rocks and cow skulls. And we want to show people, hey, no, you can have water-wise plants. You can have plants that are heat tolerant, drought tolerant, cold tolerant, and tolerant of our soils that are lush and vibrant and low maintenance. You can also incorporate that into food crops. This is a plant that's very well adapted to our area called the loquat. Looks like a magnolia tree. It's got pretty evergreen leaves, and then in a mild winter it will actually produce a fruit that tastes like a cross between a tart plum and a mango. But across the board, and all the plants we'll be talking about today, we want plants that are going to use less water, less fertilizers, less pesticide. Most of the plants we're talking about are not going to be Texas native, but they're well adapted to our climate and soils, and that helps to set us up for success in the long run. But what is a foodscape? It kind of means something different to different people. A foodscape could be a traditional vegetable garden, the ridge and furrow garden. This is kind of the garden that, like, similar to what I set up when I was just starting getting out to it. And certainly this is a viable form of food production. A lot of people like to grow in raised beds for the benefits in terms of improving the soil and easier access to harvesting and pulling weeds. This edible landscape belongs to that cat. I don't know if you noticed that in the picture, but not only are they functional, but they can be beautiful as well. I particularly like raised beds, and you don't just have to grow vegetables there. You can grow edible flowers and other ornamentals as well. But again, it's a nice place where you don't have to bend over as much, and you can bring in a soil that's more easily, or you can grow plants in more easily. I also like to tuck in edible plants all throughout my landscape. In fact, I used to, before I was a horticulturist, I used to work for a custom home building firm here in the DFW Metroplex. We built $5 to $15 million houses, and a lot of these houses, they would have Swiss chard in the landscape as a cool season annual, and the dinosaur kales and different ornamental cabbages, as well as pansies. And most people didn't realize that these plants are edible and delicious. And so, you know, just out of habit, I would be snacking on these plants. And you get to know folks building their house over a year and a half, like, Daniel, what are you doing? And it's just like, oh, you didn't know? This is Swiss chard. And it looks as, and this is in Highland Park, and just beautiful, big, you know, red stem, leafy plants that look as good as they taste. But we've got some mustard in there, some artichokes, thyme. There's all different types of plants that look as good as they taste. And if you look in that picture, those plants are edible as well. Anybody ever eaten a hosta? Those are actually one folks might be surprised that are edible. Yeah. So foodScaping is really just the practical integration of food plants. And you want it to be practical because it helps take some of the work out of there. You're going to use the same ornamental design principles, and we'll touch on some of those, but layering plants for color and texture and the different combinations that you would use with more ornamental plants, you can just apply those principles to edible plants as well, and substituting out for that unproductive plant material. I know most of us are going to have plants in their landscape that, maybe they don't like it when it gets hot, or maybe, they're kind of finicky with our heavy clay soils, or for whatever reason they're not thriving, or they're mad, you don't really like them. And you can replace those with a plant like rosemary. I think everybody in North Texas should have a rosemary plant. It's evergreen, requires almost no care, especially if you're getting a cold hardy cultivar of rosemary. And they have a beautiful bloom. The blooms are edible as well. Also, they're great for pollinators, especially the European honeybee. So you can also stack functions. So anytime we moved, my wife and I have moved several times over the past 10 years or so, she likes to, and I love my wife, she's amazing, and I need to preface that, especially because I'm being recorded. But she will tell people, I like to say she's running her mouth, but she'll be like, oh, my husband's a horticulturist, and if you have any questions, just ask him anytime, which of course I'm happy to. But when she tells people that I'm a horticulturist, or that I'm on TV talking about plants, and that everybody's secretly, silently judging me in the neighborhood of my landscape does not look perfect all day, every day. They're master gardeners in my neighborhood. They know what my house looks like. If I'm writing an article or talking about it somewhere, it's like you need to practice what you preach. I will say sometimes the cobbler's kids have no shoes. But that means when I'm selecting a plant, I want to make sure that it serves those functions or multiple functions. One, it needs to look great, bar none. I will tell you sometimes I'll have more of a mullet landscape, so it's business in the front, party in the back, but at least that front yard needs to look a little bit more kept. I also, just as a big guy who likes to eat, I want things to taste delicious. Not only in traditional edible plants, but plants that you may just think of as ornamentals, but historically they have had some type of food value. Of course, we love our pollinators, and because most of their populations are in serious decline, I would love to, I am a beekeeper myself, I love the European honeybees, but also our native bees and butterflies and hummingbirds. And then, somebody who spent most of their career in water conservation, and somebody who's pretty much a cheapskate. I don't like to pay high water bills, so I want to make sure most of my plants are very water efficient. And then other beneficial uses around the home. I was making candles yesterday and using essential oils. I know that seems bizarre, but it's something I like to do. And so if I can use something outside, inside, then that's just kind of an added bonus as well. There's all different types of styles of edible gardening to kind of meet your needs. A lot of times people like to start off with containers, and there's a beautiful container over there, the breakfast buffet with all different types of not only edible herbs, but there's flowers in there, things that are beautiful. So if you strategically put evergreens throughout the landscape, then you get something to look at and what looks pretty year-round. And a lot of people think about edibles as, oh, these are all deciduous and going to die back in the winter, but not always. You also want to consider plant size. Now, and also when you have reduced airflow, then you tend to have more fungal problems. So we want to make sure that we're giving stuff the space that they need, but we can also fudge those number a little bit so we can get more things, especially for folks living in an urban area. Now, you're not going to do a traditional type orchard, most of us here, that are kind of straight rows, but paying attention to proper spacing. Now, you see this picture at the far right, you could put some things that are a little bit larger and then alternate with some things that are medium size, and then in between there, tuck in things that are a little smaller, and so you're kind of getting more bang for your buck in a smaller area, but still wanting to have that adequate airflow. Before you put a plant in the landscape, you want to make sure that you're picking the right plant for the right place. So paying attention to the sun requirements. Most of the plants that we eat the fruit on require at least 6 hours of sunlight in order to thrive. If it's plants that we eat their vegetables vegetative growth, the leaf, the stem, or the root. Many times those can handle a little bit less sunlight, but probably are still going to do best with 3 to 4 hours of sunlight or more. You also want to pay attention to the water requirement. So on average here we get about 36 inches of rainfall. So if you are planting something like a banana that could benefit from twice that much, that's probably not ideal. So focus on the plants that actually will grow in an average rainfall year as well. You do want to make sure for the bulk of it that you're planting plants that thrive in our heavy clay soil. So when I do a checklist, if it's a plant that's going to go in my garden, that's one of the key things. Will it grow well in clay? Poor draining clays are pretty common here. Even if we amend with compost and we plant on a slope, we want to make sure that they're able to withstand that. And then amending compost will lower the pH a little bit, but for blueberries, hostas was one, unfortunately, it's a little bit of a challenge. Raspberries, things like that, they would be better off in another area. However, if you put them in a raised bed with acidified soil, you block them from the west sun, perhaps you can get some success there. But focus on the ones that want to grow in our soils. Incorporate all different types of forms, whether it's trees or vines or perennial vegetables, as well as traditional annual vegetables. You'll see a lot of times now trending at the garden centers are ornamental peppers, ornamental sweet potato vines. There's ornamental eggplants. There's all types of plants that historically, the cabbages, the kales, that people have eaten for thousands of years, and now folks associate them with an ornamental, and so you can put those in the landscape as well. But just get to know your plants. You don't have to be a plant expert before you put them in the ground, but just set yourself up for success knowing that in most years they're going to be able to withstand our sometimes harsh and unpredictable climate and put the right plant in the right spot. Now, one of my favorite plants, and I wrote an article for Edible DFW magazine, I think maybe it was 6 months ago. You can find that online. But I listed out really the easiest fruit trees to grow. We just got in our fruit trees that rooted in. We have, because I nerd out on it, we have one of the largest selections here in the Metroplex. And people come in there, they always want the apple. We already sold out of blueberries. I bring in very few blueberries because it's just not a plant that I would feel comfortable giving to someone and say, you're going to go be successful and harvest blueberries till your heart content. It's like, if you do these 10 things perfectly, then yes, you can get a handful of blueberries. I mean, it is a little bit more of a challenge, but the one that has almost no challenge, in fact, this plant is naturalized in Texas. I know a population of this, there's actually some around Lake Grapevine, where this tree, you can go and just harvest the fruits growing wild. But this, the jujube, sometimes called the Chinese date, tastes like a cross between an apple and a pear before it's perfectly ripe, and then as it ripens, it will kind of dry out a little bit like a date, which is what gives it that other name. It's a little wrinkly, but the sugars get very, very concentrated, and so it's super, super sweet. Requires almost no care at all. Figs are probably the number 2 easiest plant to grow. There are all different types of figs, ranging from 4 to 5 feet at maturity, up to, there's record figs in the Metroplex that are 20, 30 feet tall and wide. Some have a large dark purple fruit. Some have fruits that are striped. Some are white in the inside and green on the outside and tell like honey. And y'all feel free to take pictures if you like. I list all the cultivars here. Some of them are the best cultivars for our area, and then these are also those that we have here in stock at Rooted In. But once you get a fig tree established, it requires almost no care at all. And I like to joke, this is the only plant that grows candy. A perfectly ripe fig can be sweeter than candy. Especially the Latarula or the honey fig. It tastes like you're squeezing honey on your tongue. Another great easy plant to grow are the persimmon. Anybody ever eaten an unripe persimmon? It's a memory that you'll carry with you for your entire life. I mean, truly it is. However, we carry non-astringent cultivars. Those are those that you can actually eat like an apple. But there are Texas persimmons. There are an orange persimmon that's native to this area. There's the Japanese persimmon. The genus Diospyros means food of the gods. So if you can imagine a perfectly ripe persimmon is just honey and custard. If you freeze it and cut the top off and then eat it, this was one of Martha Stewart's tricks. She said that it would taste like ice cream, and it kind of looks like a little natural version of the Bluebell little miniature things where they give you the tongue depressor to eat it with. But I was like, calling her out like, I don't think that's true, Martha. And I tried it for the first time, and I'm like, wow, the consistency is exactly like ice cream. Wonderful, wonderful. But you need to eat them. My favorite way to eat a persimmon is when it's as ripe as an overripe banana. So right when my wife wants to throw out the bananas, that's like the perfect form of the persimmon, and there's several that grow well in our area. Pomegranates are another easy one to grow. Now I'll tell you, a wonderful pomegranate has done a wonderful job of advertising. It's not really even the best flavored pomegranate. It's not the most cold hardy. In fact, it's not really as adapted to our area as a lot of the other ones. However, there are pomegranates that are cold hardy to 0 degrees that do very, very well. Just like apples, they can be sweet or tart or balanced. Sometimes they can have kind of more yellowy orange fruit or pinker fruit or red. Really just depends on what you're looking for. There is some variety in the size, but once they're established, very, very easy to grow. I had pomegranates that survived -4 degrees in Richardson. They died back to the ground, but then they came back. So really remarkable. Plums are probably the easiest traditional fruit to grow. Most of the plums that we sell are going to be self-fertile, so you just have to have one. There are plums that are dark red on the inside, dark red on the outside. Those that are yellow, those that taste like sunshine, those that taste like berries, pretty much across the spectrum, and they're very easy to grow once you get them established, and these are some of the best adapted for our area there. A lot of people want to grow peaches, and in second to plums, I think are probably the easiest stone fruit to grow. In fact, I would say probably within 10 miles of here, there's a population of peaches that are just growing in a preserve. And I've driven all across Texas to see peaches growing wild. There are several issues, though, that you need to know in terms of pest and disease. And you can grow peaches, but it is a little bit more of a challenge. There's going to be some work involved than the first fruits that we talked about. But they really are a beautiful plant. There's also an ornamental peach called the bonfire that it's a mini 4 to 5 feet tall and wide. It has deep purple leaves. Anybody familiar with the bonfire? It actually does produce an edible fruit as well, and it grows very well in a pot or in container because it is a true dwarf. It's on its own rootstock. It's an ultra dwarf. It's not going to get more than 5 feet across its life. Pecans are one of our native fruits. I think most people grew up harvesting pecans and eating those. Not the ideal shade tree for an urban area. Most of y'all know this, that pecans lose their branches pretty frequently, so you wouldn't want to put it over a driveway or a sidewalk. We like to joke around that a pecan tree, when it hears thunder, it will just start dropping branches off. But if you do have some room, you can get a lot of production with growing a big pecan tree. I mentioned the loquat, and one of the challenges, loquats are very, very cold hardy. There was one just south of Valley View Mall that was 25 feet tall or so that survived Uri. It survived 1980 when we got a super, super cold event. But they're not always going to produce fruit because they flower now. And so if we get that deep freeze later in the year, then you're probably not going to get fruit set. Now there are some cultivars that do produce a little bit later, but you're always going to get that pretty foliage that's evergreen in most years, and you can also use that foliage to make a tea. But again, very tropical, one of the most tropical flavored fruits we can grow in North Texas. Another one that a lot of people are surprised that are easy to grow are the Asian pears. Now, pears and apples are notorious for getting fire blight as well as several other pests and disease, but Asian pears are very resilient. In fact, one of my buddies planted one 20 or so years ago at Texas A&M AgriLife on Coit and Campbell, and that pear is still there on its own, hadn't been taken care of in 10 years, and is still producing fruit. Tastes more like an apple than a pear, and I would say a perfectly ripe Asian pear rivals any apple, if you can imagine that. Apples, speaking of which, Probably 2 in terms of most popular fruit trees when people want to come buy them at our nursery. You want to make sure that you're getting a lower chill apple so it will actually produce fruit in our area. The other challenge with apples is they get caught in root rot, which is pretty prolific in our soils here. They also, in addition to the fire blight that we mentioned, that is spread readily by the Bradford pears. Then they also get the plum cucurlio, the little worm that we have an issue with. It's a weevil larva on the peaches and the apples, sometimes the plums. And then the other one is cedar apple rust. So that's a fungus that goes back and forth. The one life stage is on the apple and the next stage is on the juniper. And so you can grow apples successfully here. It's just maybe not as easy as some of the other ones. There are a few edible shrubs that grow very, very well here. I love bay laurel. Not only is it a beautiful plant, it smells great. It's got a nice tiny little flower that pollinators like. It also produces an edible fruit. In our area, they're naturalized in Houston, but in our area, they're not as cold hardy as a lot of plants. So, mine usually stay 3 to 4 feet tall and wide, and then we'll get a cold year and they die back. They're a shorter lived perennial, but it's something. There's neat ones that have long, skinny leaves. You can do them in pots and move them in, but they're great, of course, for incorporating into soups and stews. Another one of our native edibles that are absolutely gorgeous are the elderberries. Now, these naturally will grow in riparian areas along creeks that flood. They produce in the spring a huge white bloom. If you ever had, is it a French 75 that uses elderberry liqueur? They're just taking those blooms and soaking them in vodka. Wonderful floral notes, sweet. You can also, as they produce that, some people will actually dip them and kind of fry them. Then the elderberries themselves you would harvest and make into syrups or jams, or you can freeze them. You do either need to heat them up or freeze them because there's a mild toxin that's inside. And so if you ate a lot raw on an empty stomach, you would get a tummy ache. So it is better to heat them up. But there are several cultivars that were bred to have increased production. There are also, there are a lot of new European ones that are bred by their ornamental traits. So that one is, I believe, a black lace. There are some that get 4 to 5 feet tall and wide that have lacy purple leaves, some that have broad purple leaves, some that have chartreuse leaves that are broad, some that get 8 foot tall and 3 feet wide. All these elderberries and those pink blooms, I think, are as pretty as anything you can find in the landscape, and pollinators love them as well. Many people have a negative connotation with mulberries. Mulberries are a plant that we used to ride our bikes around the neighborhood and eat as a kid and have fond memories. I would argue that a perfectly ripe mulberry rivals or exceeds a perfectly ripe blackberry. And blackberry is my favorite fruit. It's my birthday is July 4th, and I always have blackberry cobbler. I don't really want cake. I want the cobbler and ice cream. But there's a lot of different diversity in the mulberries. Some of them, a Girardi is one that I was growing in Richardson that only gets 4 to 5 feet tall. Illinois everbearing is one that's kind of more 8 to 10 feet tall. Sometimes it can get a little bit bigger than that, up to 20 feet tall, but generally it's more small. Some that are black fruiting, some that are red fruiting, some that to know if it is a black fruiting variety and you're eating it with it's red. When it's red, it's a mild hallucinogen, which is, we're just going around eating them as kids, and it's like, what were our parents during this? There's also some things that you may not know that you can grow here. One of those is a satsuma, and this is a Texas superstar. It's actually a cross between a satsuma and a mandarin, which are just small little orange-like fruits. The satsumas are a lot more cold hardy than traditional citrus, and on books these started out cold hardy to 12 degrees, and then they were cold hardy to 10 degrees. At my home in Richardson, after being established, cold hardy to 9 degrees. So during Uri, I planted it, And then I went and dug it up and put it in a Home Depot bucket and stuck it in my garage for a few days, and then brought it outside. And then I think it was 2 years later, we hit 9, and it did just fine in the ground. Now it did die back, but then it came back from there. It's on its own rootstock. So most citrus, if they died back, you'd be in a pickle because the rootstock would be something that was pretty much an inedible citrus. Also in the bottom right, you can see that is a kumquat. Anybody ever eaten a kumquat? So they're great. They're sour on the inside, kind of like a lemon or a lime, and it's this thin rind on the outside that is actually the sweet part. So it tastes like eating marmalade in fruit form. Goji berry is another shrub. This is one of the most expensive foods that you can find at the grocery store. They're a nitrogen fixer. Anybody ever eaten a goji berry? Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs sideways, thumbs up. Yeah, sideways. So I would tell you, to me, when we are selling goji berries and they're fruiting, I always encourage people to eat a fruit before they buy it. So the jujubes are fruiting, the goji berry, these are things that most people have not eaten, because I don't want you to take it home and you grow it for 3 years, you're like, oh, this is gross. And so the goji berry, it's one of the healthiest foods. It's higher in lycopene than tomatoes. To me, it tastes like a super sweet tomato, the sweetest tomato that you've ever eaten. But the backside is, you ever get those sweet peppers in the bag at the grocery store, and you cut it open and there's that little membrane, the white membrane at the side. It's probably a good idea to get the seeds and most of the membrane out. But if you taste it, it's slightly bitter. Not completely inedible, but just you'd rather remove it most of the time. That's the aftertaste of a goji berry. When you dry them down, it's similar to a currant or a raisin, and that kind of aftertaste is mitigated. And some people eat them and they're just like, oh, this is wonderful. I don't know what you're talking about. And some people eat them like, thank you so much for telling me. This is not for me, and move on to the next thing. But it's another great plant that has ornamental value as well. Pineapple guava, we used to not recommend these because they're not on paper really cold hardy to our area. They're more of a short-lived perennial. However, we have several clients in and around the Metroplex that when we did hit -4 degrees, these established plants died back to the ground, but we've heard at least 3 accounts where they've come back. So I think if it can survive -4, then what else do you want out of a plant? They are beautiful. They're evergreen in most years, and they have one of the most beautiful flowers or blooms of any edible, and that blooms are edible as well. Not a true guava, but a similar vein as a guava. There's also blackberries. Blackberries are probably one of the easiest fruits to grow. It's a close relative to our native dewberry. Several different cultivars that grow well here depending on what you want. We like to do thornless most of the time just because it makes it a little bit easier. The one that I'm most excited about now is the second one on there. It's called a Sweet Arc Ponca. And the Primarchs were bred for the University of Arkansas program to produce on the floricanes and the primocanes, the new and the old growth. So you'll get more fruit set, and you typically will get heavy fruit set in the spring and then a little bit more in the fall. The Primarch Freedom is a great one. There's Traveler is another great one. But the Sweet Arcs is a huge, very productive blackberry that is super sweet. Now the Primarch is equally as good, but it's a little bit more sour. And then more traditional ones are like the Caddo, the Natchez, the Ouachita. A lot of people like those. And then the Triple Crown is a new later season one that's a big flavorful berry as well. Grapes, remarkably enough, have y'all ever had Michael Cook come and talk to y'all? He is the viticulturist for the area. He works with Texas A&M AgriLife. If he hasn't, you should kind of jot his name down, Michael Cook. So he did trial gardens on grapes all across Texas, and then looked and see which ones required less pruning, less spraying, which ones were easier for homeowners to grow. And these are 4 that rose to the top. In fact, there's one of my Edible DFW articles edibles I did, I think it was last spring, but all on pick your own berry farms. And there's a map there, and you can find when they're open, and kind of a neat thing. But there is a pick your own black Spanish grape farm just kind of south of Fort Worth that you can harvest them in late July, August if y'all wanted to do a field trip. Blanc de Bois is a great, very hardy white grape. Champanelle is a cross between the grape that makes Concord grape juice and then one of our native grapevines. So it's very, very productive, very, very pest and disease resistant. My third year of having it at my home in Richardson, I got 20 pounds of grapes and pretty much did nothing. I mean, I pruned it back in the fall, but that was it, and just harvested and beat the birds off when they were trying to eat them. And then Victoria Wet Red is another one that's a good sweet, juicy, kind of bigger muscadine type grape. There's also a lot of showy herbaceous edibles. So these are more traditional edibles that you can kind of mix throughout your landscape. I mentioned the artichoke. Beets are the same scientific name as Swiss chard, Beta vulgaris. I think beet greens, not only do they look as good as Swiss chard, but I think they taste better. They're slightly salty. Kale is another one we mentioned. Any kind of bean that is purple or spotted, these kind of look similar to the hyacinth bean that everybody likes to grow for the beauty, which is also edible. Dolichos lablab is the green bean of India. India is now predicted to be one of the, I think it's the most populated continent, but the country of India is now supposed to be, I think it's going to be number 2 or number 1 here, but very populous, and everybody eats those. And then, most of us grow the hyacinth bean as just an ornamental, but also edible, the flowers. The peppers, so mix in some of those traditional peppers. All the ornamental peppers are edible too. Don't believe anybody that says that they aren't. I did trial research at Texas Tech on all the ornamental peppers, and after we were done collecting the data, I ate every single one of them. And out of the 24 or so different cultivars that we trialed, there was only one that I was like, this is gross. But all the rest of them were either sweet or really spicy, but all very, very good. Of course, the eggplants, the lettuces, the eggplants, there's so much diversity. There's orange, there's white, those that are little balls, those are kind of more traditional eggplant shape. Anybody ever grown sunchokes? Sunchokes? Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs sideways. So sunchokes are a arguably Texas native to northern Mexico, far south Texas, a relative of the Maximilian sunflowers. You get the pretty blooms, but it produces a root that tastes similar to a potato, looks more like ginger. The biggest challenges with growing, anybody growing Maximilian sunflower? So it's a plant that spreads very, very aggressively, and so do sunchokes. So if it produces 20 pounds of roots for one plant, and you only harvest 19 pounds, then you're going to be in trouble, because you're going to have twice as many the next year and twice as so. In a container is great, but it's beautiful blooms. It produces a really kind of tasty root. Sweet potato, Ipomoea batatas. The same sweet potato vine that you buy as an ornamental is the same scientific name as the sweet potato you buy in the grocery store. We did this in Kenya, where we went to the market, and everybody thought that all the seeds and the seed potatoes and that stuff you had to get from Nairobi. That was kind of like that. We were in like La Mesa, Texas, and you were getting all your stuff from Dallas, and it's completely different climate and everything's different. But we would go to the market and harvest all the sweet potatoes and make sweet potato slips, and some of them have green leaves, heart-shaped, but some of them had purple leaves that were very deeply laced, and some of them were more chartreuse, and every shape across the board. And that's what sweet potatoes are. We just bred them to look like that. Now, the chartreuse ones aren't really as delicious. Sometimes they're a little bit woody, but if you're growing sweet potato vine, why wouldn't you grow a cultivar that tastes good? than one that you're not going to get anything out of. You can eat the leaves of all of them. We mentioned asparagus. Arugula is a reseeding annual for me, a beautiful kind of lacy, nutty flavored when it's young. These are all perennials, so asparagus, artichokes, Jerusalem artichokes, chives, both onion and garlic chives and sorrel, you can plant once and they'll just kind of grow and grow and grow. If you ever grown garlic chives, you'll know that they'll grow and grow and grow, then go to your neighbor's house and grow and grow and grow. Herbs, the useful plants, whether it's basil or pineapple sage, mint, dill, oregano, rosemary, the sorrel, thyme, cilantro, alliums. How beautiful are all these? The blooms are also edible. So most herbs, the blooms taste just like an intense version of the leaves. I love them for cocktails or kind of garnishing salads. They're great. You can also mix the flowers into pestos. This may be one of the most beautiful plants that I plant in the garden that's just a favorite of my wife and daughter and me. The pollinators love it. You can use it. It's a cross between traditional Italian basil as well as a Thai basil. So it's kind of the best of both worlds and a bloom that I think rivals. It's actually the sepals is kind of the darker purple, but the flowers are the pink on the inside. There's also a lot of variegated herbs. You may have seen these around. There's a variegated oregano and marjoram, sage, mints, thymes, society garlic. Many people don't realize that society garlic is edible. You eat the leaves, the stems, and the flowers, not the root on those. It's not a true allium. And then there's the variegated one as well. It's a great pollinator plant. It's planted mostly ornamentally. I tell people if you eat it raw, though, it's like biting into a raw garlic clove at the same time as somebody slapping you in the face. So it's a jolt, but if you cook it, it mellows out and it's very, very nice. The reason it's called society garlic is because it's supposed to not give you bad garlic breath, so you can eat it in polite society. I'll let y'all try that at home with your significant other, though. Hey, honey. Shiso. Anybody ever grown beefsteak plant? So this is in the mint family. It tastes like a cross between mint and basil. If you've ever eaten the Vietnamese soup pho, many times it's put over there. If you've eaten spring rolls, a lot of times it's incorporated in there. They can be green with an entire kind of smooth leaf. They can be serrated like this one, purple. I will say if you grow this, it works well in low sunlight as well as full sunlight. You're always going to have it. It's a reseeding annual that will form a ground cover, but it's beautiful and it's tasty, so it has a home in my garden. Mexican mint marigold, some people call this Texas tarragon, actually native to North America, but this is a crucial nectar source of the monarch butterflies because it's indigenous to their range. I think it tastes better than French tarragon, personally. I love this mixed into chicken salad. It makes my favorite chicken salad. I will never make chicken salad without using this plant inside it. I hate licorice, but it's more of it's very mild and it's sweet and subtle. The blooms are also edible, and then we love it. And you think I'm a lush. I maybe have one cocktail a month, if that. But I do like to incorporate the flowers, float them on, like if you're making a Moscow Mule or something, or you could put them on a salad, you could candy them and put them on a dessert. People eat with your eyes, and we use edible flowers. It just kind of is a pop. Speaking of edible flowers, now this is where we get into the weird stuff. I've already talked about some weird edibles, but eating flowers is something that's not for everyone, but it can help your gardens look the best they can year round. One of them that you may have heard of are marigolds. The marigolds and calentulas, the pot marigolds, are edible. Zinnias are also edible as well. Zinnias, just because something just because something is edible doesn't mean it tastes good. So some zinnias are not the best. Some of them taste great, and some of them taste just as good as any bitter green that you would put inside of a salad. And so if you're making a salad and you put some zinnia petals in there, you look real fancy. I do this all the time. I've done TV segments where I've made little goat cheese crackers and put some chives and some pansies on it. When I make it and people come over, I'm just like, yeah, my wife made these. So then people aren't, thinking weird things about me. But I kind of bust out of those ginger stereotypes. I love any kind of a plant. Dianthus, sometimes dianthus or cheddar pinks, they taste a little bit cinnamony. I will tell, if you're eating flowers, pull the parts apart. Just eating a whole flower, a lot of times like the stamen, or there's one part about the sepal that is bitter. A lot of times the petals at the very bottom are very sweet, and then you'll have more complex flavors going up. But you get a cinnamon, a spicy flavor with dianthus sometimes in the Mexican tarragon. Sweet alyssum, anybody ever eaten that? This is a brassica. This is related to a mustard, so you get kind of a mustardy, radishy flavor with those. You can also, instead of growing in the ground, you can grow many edible plants in a container as well. And I think potted herbs, using the same spiller, filler, thriller techniques are absolutely wonderful. But you can see things that have a little bit broader leaf next to things that have a little bit finer leaf, things that spill over the pot, things that kind of give it a little bit height. The more linear leaf creates that contrast too. You've got on the far right the variegated thyme, so stuff with variegated leaves pitted with stuff that has a darker green leaves. Again, you just get more pop. And in landscape design, what we really try and do is avoid the green blob, right? When you have big green leaf next to big green leaf next to big green leaf, it just all kind of fades together. But if you have something that has a big green leaf next to something that has a linear leaf next to something that has either a slightly lighter or darker leaf, it just kind of creates more pop. And then of course the blooms there are great. And look at that variegated marjoram or oregano just spilling over the front of the pot. I think those are striking. I mean, I would put them anywhere in my landscape and have no problem. And we do it a lot too, because especially around Thanksgiving and Christmas, like buying all those little clam shells with the herbs, those are for the birds. So I like growing them myself. Your edible gardens can be bountiful, dense, diverse, eccentric, and wild. If that's your gardening style, I would lean into that. But they can also be orderly and formal. If you grow in a raised bed or a bed that has more clean lines, and just growing plants that tend to be more compact, we're actually going through and pruning those. Anybody ever grown like a boxwood basil, or there's a little ever something basil, but they're just smaller, more compact, smaller leaves. They produce a lot of them. They look very, very nice. There's also many plants that are probably already in your landscape that have edible value, and they've been eaten for thousands of years. Yaupon holly is the only plant indigenous to North America that has caffeine. Now there are 3 companies in Texas that produce a tea that uses Yaupon holly leaves. People pay them to come on their property and haul off the Yaupon that is aggressively kind of taking over ranches, and then use that to make a caffeinated tea. It can taste like a green tea, or if you roast it, it can taste more like a black tea. But a lot of people think that's kind of weird, but the berries are mildly toxic, but the leaves themselves are great and very useful. Autumn olive, anybody ever grown this one? People call it Ely Agnes is the other name. People that don't like it call it Ugly Agnes. I'm like, that's not nice. But this produces fruit right now. If you have a autumn olive, go underneath it. It'll have those kind of grayish green silvery leaves, and on the underside it'll be white with the red kind of polka dots on there. And if you lift up, you'll never notice them, but if you lift up, there'll be these little fruits hanging on the bottom. The fruit tastes exactly like a raspberry, but raspberry has that little hole in there, and if you put a peanut inside there and ate it, that's what it. So you can just pull the meat off the seed in the inside, but the seed is edible too. It tastes very similar to a raspberry inside of a peanut. The red bud leaves taste like peas because, again, they are in the pea family. The young leaves are edible, as well as the young samaras that arise from the fruit, or the pods that arise from the fruit. Wax myrtle is a close relative of the bay that we talked about earlier. In fact, the wax myrtle is indigenous to Louisiana, and one of the most common shrimp boil, crab boil little bags actually has wax myrtle in it. It's referred to as bayberry. It's another common name for it. Turk's cap is a native hibiscus that produces an edible flower, edible leaf, as well as an edible fruit called the Turk's apple. Mesquite, I did an article for the Dallas Morning News talking about how to make mesquite flour, but not only are the flowers edible, but also the pods themselves. They can make a little jelly, and then you can grind them in to make a flour. American beautyberry is a plant that is great for making jellies. It's also great for making syrups, which is what I call my jelly when it doesn't set up. And then the opuntia. Have anyone's ever had, a lot of times, even every grocery store now will have little pickled cactus pads that have kind of been juliennes that they call napolitas. They're great with eggs or just great using any kind of pickle. Not only are the pads edible, which is why I like to get the spineless ones, but also the fruits are edible as well. My wife likes to make prickly pear jelly and syrup. And then there was something else I wanted to touch on. Oh, Texas Highways did like a collection of all their recipes, and they have an apple pie clone that instead of apples is you're just using the prickly pad leaf, and it is incredible. Incredible. Surprising, right? I mean, it sounds weird. Was there something else? No, I think that was the last one. The best fertilizer is the gardener's shadow. So the more time you spend in your edible landscape, you're going to see, if this is a pest that kind of jumps up, or this one needs a little bit more water, or this one needs a little bit of fertilizer. Not only is this going to be healthier for the plants in your landscape, but we know statistically this will be healthier for us as well. The more time we spend in the garden, and I'm preaching to the choir here, but doing physical activity, it's good for us, but also our mental health. And I think that's something that I can use help with on all accounts. That is what I have for today. If anybody has any questions and we have time, I'd love to address those now. Yes, ma'am?
Where can we find seedlings of that cardinal basil?
Yeah, so it's actually fairly common. Most of your local nurseries should have cardinal basil. We are doing the Go and Grow boxes where you get the 24 plants and the 3 designs. We have an edible box that's available in the fall. We carry those in those, and then we usually carry them in stock at the nursery. But I would call most of your local nurseries, and they should have either the plants themselves or the seeds. We were rooted in, yeah. So it's a long haul. It took me about an hour to get here, but we're about 20 miles north of Frisco. If you know where Salina is, we're closest to downtown Salina than we are to Pilot Point. Any other questions? Thought I saw another hand. Yes, ma'am.
I tried growing lettuces, and when I picked them, they were just like limp and gross and nothing that you would want to eat. Do you have any suggestions? Do I have the wrong variety?
Sure. So one thing to do is before you harvest, like the day before you're going to harvest, to water them a little bit at night. It's also a good idea to harvest them in the morning while it's still cool. And then, like my friends that grow, like I don't know if have y'all had Jeff Bednar's give a talk here with Profound Microfarms? That's another name you should write down. He has outside of Allen, Texas, a big hydroponic greenhouse, and he has a company where during COVID they started doing more. They sell to restaurants, but they'll go and deliver produce, and they actually deliver to your house now. But what he does is they'll put them in an ice water bath, and then that kind of shocks them, and then they're able to be shipped long distance. But if you do that and then you put them in the refrigerator, a lot of times what I'll do too is in the refrigerator we'll wrap, even if it's just the base of them, with a damp paper towel or just a paper towel, and that helps them, it just prevents them from drying out. Also, if it's too moist in there, they can start to break down quicker. But if you're buying lettuce from a grocery store, you'll be lucky if it lasts 5 to 6 days without going to mush. But like Jeff's lettuces that he grows hydroponically and then we'll shock them with the ice water, those will last in the refrigerator for 2 to 3 weeks. Because the lettuce that's been harvested from your grocery store has more lead time because it's got to be shipped across the country. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Have you ever, in your experiencing edibles, eaten something that was not such a good idea?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I'm trying to think of. I eat weird stuff every day. I would probably say, and this is not bragging, it's just, it's probably not a good thing, but I have a more diverse diet than almost anybody I know, because if a plant has edible value, I have eaten it. I've eaten insects, I've eaten everything under the sun. I love going to Asian grocery stores, Indian grocery stores, anywhere where there's wild foods. I do teach classes on foraging. I'm trying to think off the top of my head something that is particularly not good. But yeah, do I take a bite and spit stuff out all the time? The persimmon was the first thing that I can remember. I mean, maybe I was riding my bike to the grocery store, so maybe 8th grade or so, and yeah, I saw it was on sale, and so I'm like, I've never had this fruit before, it's on sale, I'm going to buy it, and then you just bite into it, and your whole mouth, like the most dry wine you've ever eaten, it's like a film or like a powder or hairiness to your mouth. I've also eaten some wild grapes, like a Mustang grape. Some of them, if you wait to get them completely sweet, they're very, very good. They're great in jellies, but if you eat one that's not right, especially it's the skin on the outside that's not great. Different plums, wild plums, certainly when they're perfectly sweet, they're great, but when they're sour, not so great. And then, stuff that's just gone bad, right? Like, one of the things that I think is the most disgusting to me as somebody who will eat pretty much anything is a bad pecan. You're eating all these sweet pecans and you just get one that's bad, and it's like, it scares you. It's like, I don't want to eat any more of these right now because this one was so off-putting. But sure. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to ask about plants for the heat of the summer.
Plants for the heat of the summer besides okra and summer peas and maybe peppers?
Sure. So, you mentioned okra, and I really love, especially doing the red okras. There's a hill country red and then another one. But okra is a hibiscus, and so it produces the beautiful hibiscus flower, which is also edible. Another one that a lot of people aren't familiar with are the Malabar spinach. Anybody grown Malabar spinach? Yeah, so it is a beautiful, you cook it like spinach, but it's going to take like 3 times as much to cook down as spinach. But if you're using it in any recipe that incorporates spinach, it's great. You can eat it raw as well when it's younger. It also produces a fruit that's edible that is one of the most powerful pigments, a very, very deep purple. You can use it to make jellies with, but it produces, when all your other leafy greens are dying, it will produce all through the summer. And it's a reseeding annual, so once you have it, it will kind of hang around for a while. Another one that I really like is, so when your green beans are fading out, green beans are good in the spring and again in the fall, but they don't really like it in the heat of the summer. The Asian long bean, which is the same genus and species as black-eyed peas. So black-eyed peas are great to grow through the summer, but the viney black-eyed pea that produces long, kind of waxy green beans, they can be either yellow or purple or green, and if you cut them up, especially the green ones, every 2 inches or so, and you make green beans, nobody in your family would have any idea that it's not a traditional green bean. But you're not letting them kind of the pods ripen and turn into a black-eyed pea. It is just going to be a smaller kind of green bean type seed on the inside. I'm trying to think what else. Of course, the eggplants. Last year during the summer, eggplant was probably the most productive plant in my garden, rivaling okra. Funny enough, baba ganoush, if you've never had baba ganoush, is basically like a burnt eggplant dish. Y'all should make that. It's wonderful. There's lots of other stuff too. I'm just kind of trying to think about what's there. Anybody else? What's their favorite thing to grow through the summer? Peppers, yeah, peppers, very, very productive. Cherry tomatoes, indeterminate tomatoes, when it gets a cooler spell, they'll keep producing. Yes, ma'am.
So I have a low plot tree that I've been putting into my greenhouse in the winter. You tell me I can plant it.
So the question was, can she put her loquat in the ground and it will be fine? If you put it in the ground like now, and we have a mild winter next winter, there's a good chance that it will be perennial at least 5-6 years or plus. Again, there are some in the ground in DFW that have been in the ground 20, 30 plus years. If we do get a Uri type storm and it's fairly new, that's probably not ideal with it. I typically will put them in a protected area. So if you put it on the south side of a home, especially if it's a brick home and the sun radiates heat off there, the other thing is you put it closer to your house, your home is always going to have the heater running, when it does get down to 0 degrees. So those areas of your landscape are just going to be warmer because, the heat is coming from there. And then if it does get really, really cold, then I would wait the day before it gets cold, let the ground warm up, and then maybe 3-4 o'clock, then go and cover it up. If you wanted to, you could get heat tape, but if it's established 3 years, even if it dies back, it's just going to come back from the roots. But they're reliably cold hardy, it's just they need some establishment to get there. All right, thank y'all so much for having me.